The Galactic patrol ship Aurora Reach moved through silent space near the border of the Terran defense zone. Its silver hull gleamed faintly in the light of a distant sun. Inside its long corridors, alien cadets of many species trained together under the watchful eyes of human instructors. Among them was Thrixa, a young cadet from the Solari race known for their calm minds and crystal blue skin. Thrixa had studied human history for years but had never served beside them until now. She had always believed humans were strange creatures, reckless and emotional, yet somehow unstoppable when pushed. The human liaison officer aboard the ship was Commander Mira Khan. She had dark eyes that missed nothing and a calmness that carried through even when alarms blared. The humans were few in number, but everyone respected them because they came from Earth, the only planet to survive on a death world, and still reach the stars. During a joint drill, the ship passed through a field of magnetic storms that shook the deck. Lights flickered and Thrixa lost her footing. A heavy storage case slid from the rack in the med bay. She reached out and caught it just before it smashed to the floor. Inside, she saw several small vials filled with a faintly glowing liquid, labeled only with Terran script. The shaking worsened and she had no time to ask what it was. Thinking it was a stimulant for focus, she opened one vial and swallowed the contents. The effect hit instantly. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, but her thoughts became sharp like a blade. Every sound grew clearer. The hum of the engines, the distant footfalls of crew, even the slow pulse of her own veins. Her hands stopped trembling. She could feel energy moving through her limbs like a current waiting to act. Before she could report the mistake, the alarm klaxon screamed. Pirates had dropped out of FTL right beside them. They were scavengers allied with a rival empire and armed to the teeth. Laser fire lit up the void, and the Aurora Reach shook as the shields absorbed the first wave. The crew scrambled to battle stations. Thrixa moved faster than she ever had. Her vision narrowed and the world slowed. Each movement of her crewmates looked deliberate and slow, as if she were living a second ahead of time. Mira Khan's voice came over the comm, calm and direct like a beacon through the storm. Cadet Thrixa, seal Corridor 6, and reroute power to aft shields. Keep your breathing steady. Thrixa obeyed without hesitation. She found herself predicting where the next impact would land and shifting balance just before it hit. When an explosion tore open a secondary hatch, she grabbed a fallen engineer by the harness and pulled him clear before the fire suppressant closed. Mira saw it on the monitors and paused just for a second. That speed wasn't natural. In the command deck, Mira demanded a medtech's report. When they checked the inventory, the missing vial was confirmed. It was not a stimulant. It was part of Project Starborn, a human combat serum built for soldiers in deep crisis. It didn't create rage. It turned panic into perfect focus and pushed reflexes to their limit. It was meant for battlefield medics and emergency responders only under strict dosage. Mira's expression hardened. The serum wasn't lethal to aliens, but unpredictable. Below deck, Thrixa kept fighting to keep systems online as boarding pods hit the hull. She moved with uncanny precision, anticipating enemy entry points by listening to the vibrations in the metal. When the first raider breached, she used a wrench to knock out his weapon and triggered a lockdown before he could fire. The corridor filled with smoke and light, but she remained steady, breathing in rhythm just as the humans had taught in drills. Mira's voice returned over comms. Thrixa, this is Commander Khan. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound. You are doing well. Stay aware of your body. Do not let the serum control you. You control it. The pirates tried to cut their way through, but Mira's reinforcements arrived from the starboard bay, clearing the decks in short bursts. Within minutes, the raiders retreated, leaving wrecked pods behind. The Aurora Reach floated scarred but intact. When the smoke cleared, Mira found Thrixa standing still at the center of the corridor, breathing slow, eyes sharp, but distant. Her body trembled slightly, not from fear but from the rush fading. Mira approached quietly and held out a med scanner. You swallowed a Terran combat serum, she said. You should be unconscious right now. Thrixa blinked and looked down at her hands. The trembling stopped. I caught the vial. I thought it was focus aid. I'm sorry, Commander. Mira studied her a moment longer, then nodded. You saved 6 lives. That serum is dangerous because it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you feel invincible. But you listened to orders and stayed in control. That matters more than strength. The med team escorted Thrixa to sickbay for monitoring. The readings were strange but stable. Her neural patterns showed heightened focus and reaction speed far above normal Solari range. The doctor recommended keeping her under observation for 48 hours. Mira agreed, but privately wondered how much of the reaction was human design and how much was the alien mind adapting to it. When night fell aboard the Aurora Reach, Thrixa sat awake staring at the stars through the viewport. She could still feel the echo of that strange calm, the sense that every movement had meaning. She remembered the look on Mira's face, not of anger but respect. She whispered softly to herself, "If this is how humans see the world in crisis, no wonder the galaxy fears them." In the command deck, Mira filed her report under Starborn Protocol Early Activation Incident 1, noting in quiet words that something new had begun, something the galaxy would soon notice. New focus. New rules the next morning on the Aurora Reach. Thrixa woke to the low hum of the ship's systems and the faint vibration through the deck that meant the engines were back at full power. Her mind still felt sharper than before, though the heavy thrum in her veins had softened into a quiet rhythm. The med team had kept her under watch all night while Mira Khan stood outside the observation window reading every chart herself. Humans were known for controlling what they created, and this serum was one of their most secret military tools. Yet Thrixa had taken it by accident, and somehow her body had adapted rather than collapsed. When Mira finally stepped inside the room, her tone carried no anger, only the steady weight of command. She told Thrixa that she had shown discipline during the attack, and for that the crew owed her respect. But discipline must continue long after the battle. Thrixa nodded and listened carefully. Mira then explained what the serum was meant for. It was not a stimulant or a drug of courage, but a chemical key designed to unlock calm under chaos. When used properly, it kept soldiers focused in moments where fear could destroy a team's unity. On Earth, such conditions came from centuries of disaster storms, quakes, and endless conflict that forged the Terran mind into something cold under pressure. Humans had learned to turn fear itself into energy, to make the heart beat not with panic but precision. The serum was a bottled form of that survival instinct, and it was never meant to spread beyond Terran DNA. Mira asked Thrixa to describe what she had felt during the battle. Thrixa took her time searching for words because her mind replayed everything in slow detail. She spoke of how time seemed to stretch, how the noise of chaos turned into patterns she could read, how she could almost hear the timing of the ship's pulse and feel where the enemy would strike. Mira wrote it all down. She had read hundreds of reports from humans on the serum's effects, but never from another species. This data could change everything. Later that day, Mira allowed Thrixa to rejoin duty under supervision. The crew's mood was tense yet curious. Some aliens whispered that Thrixa had become half-human now, while others kept a respectful distance, unsure if the change would last. Thrixa herself felt uncertain. The clarity remained like a bright flame inside her, and every movement of the crew seemed slower than before. Even conversation felt stretched, as if everyone spoke one heartbeat late. She decided to stay quiet and work, following the rhythm of orders. Their new mission was to track the pirate group that had attacked them. Intelligence from the captured raider suggested that they were scouting for a larger force, hiding near a debris field 3 light days away. The debris had once been a mining station torn apart during an old border war, now a graveyard of metal fragments and electromagnetic haze that made scanners useless. Mira knew it was dangerous to enter blind, but the only way to find out was to go in. Before departure, she briefed the crew. She told them that humans did not survive by brute force, but by using what the environment offered. In a storm, the wind could be a weapon. In darkness, silence could kill faster than light. Thrixa listened carefully, realizing that every Terran strategy was built around turning weakness into strength. They launched at dawn cycle, their drive silent and cool to avoid detection. The ship slid into the debris field where shadows drifted like ghosts and every flicker of static felt alive. Thrixa's sharpened senses caught small details others missed. She noticed rhythm breaks in the background radiation and realized they were not random. They were the pulse of hidden drone emitters placed in a net. She alerted Mira, who immediately changed course. Using short engine bursts, the Aurora Reach wove through narrow gaps while sending fake signals from old wrecks to confuse the enemy. When a cluster of drones lit up to scan, Thrixa calculated their angles faster than the ship's computer and suggested a safe vector that brought them behind the drone's blind arc. Mira's second officer stared at her as if she were reading the void itself. After 3 hours, they reached the heart of the field where a civilian transport floated damaged and dark, life signs faint but present. Mira ordered a rescue operation despite the risk of ambush. Marines in powered suits launched from the hangar, and Thrixa joined as tactical advisor. Inside the wreck, they found a group of miners trapped behind sealed bulkheads. When power returned, the beacon lit up brighter than expected. That was when the sensor screamed warning. Dozens of pirate ships uncloaked around the field. Mira ordered full retreat, but the pirates were already firing. The Aurora Reach shook as energy bolts ripped through its outer shields. Thrixa coordinated the Marines remotely, directing them through debris paths where magnetic storms disrupted targeting locks. Every calculation came to her faster than she could think, as if her instincts were now tied to the hum of the void. Mira noticed this from the bridge and quietly adjusted her orders to match Thrixa's rhythm. The coordination was perfect. When the last civilian was aboard, the ship executed a full burn through the densest part of the debris, where no pirate dared follow. The fragments tore at the shields, but the crew held steady. Once clear, the pirates broke off pursuit. They had lost more than half their force in their own traps. Mira exhaled slowly and turned to her officers with calm pride. Thrixa sat in the auxiliary bay breathing deeply. The aftershock of adrenaline pulsed in her chest. The serum still flowed, but fainter now, like a memory fading with each heartbeat. She wondered how long it would last before she returned to normal. Mira arrived beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did well, cadet," she said. "You used focus, not fury. That is the difference between a weapon and a soldier." Thrixa nodded, but asked what would happen when the serum wore off. Mira looked at her for a moment before answering that the human body forgets fast, but the mind remembers what it learned under pressure. The serum was temporary, but the lesson was permanent. Mira told her that the real purpose of Starborn Protocol was not to make heroes, but to teach restraint in the face of power. That night, Thrixa recorded her personal log. She spoke of her respect for human calm under chaos and how her view of them had changed. They were not reckless. They were deliberate in the moments that mattered most. She swore to train her mind to reach that same focus without relying on chemistry. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted by like silent witnesses. None of them knew that deep within the same debris field another fleet had begun to gather, larger than the pirates, led by a rival empire preparing to strike. The humans would call it an invasion spear, and Thrixa's test had only just begun. Trial by storm days passed as the Aurora Reach continued its patrol along the outer rim, where fragments of the old war floated like bones of a forgotten giant. The crew repaired damaged systems and replaced scorched panels, while the human commander Mira Khan worked quietly at her console studying reports from the intelligence network. Every new piece of data pointed toward one conclusion: the pirates had been a test run for something much larger. Their attack patterns were too coordinated and their equipment too advanced for scavengers. Someone had supplied them, and that someone was preparing for war. Thrixa spent long hours in the observation dome trying to still her mind. The serum's effects had faded, but its echo lingered in her memory. She could remember the clarity she had felt in battle, the stillness that let her see through chaos. Now everything seemed slower again, and the return to normal felt strange, like coming down from the crest of a wave. She practiced breathing the way Mira had taught in quiet counts, steady and deep to keep her focus sharp without chemical aid. Mira joined her one evening carrying 2 mugs of synthetic tea. She handed one to Thrixa and stood beside her at the wide glass wall, looking out at the distant storm clouds of a gas giant spinning below. Mira said the Council had sent observers to join them on the next operation. They wanted to ensure human technology was being used responsibly. Thrixa frowned slightly because she knew what that meant. The Council still didn't trust humanity even after everything they had done to protect joint colonies. Mira simply smiled and said, trust was never given, it had to be earned again and again. 2 days later, the observers arrived. They were tall, gray-skinned diplomats from the Varn Confederacy, known for their arrogance and slow speech. They treated Mira like a curious animal rather than an ally asking endless questions about Terran methods. Mira answered calmly, never showing irritation, though her officers grew tense. Thrixa stayed silent but watched every move. She could see the pattern behind their questions. They were fishing for data on Starborn technology, but Mira gave them nothing. Then the alarm rang. Sensors detected multiple warp signatures entering nearby space. A Dreadnought-class vessel accompanied by a swarm of stealth drones appeared on the edge of radar range. The invaders moved straight toward the moon of Tethra, where civilian settlements lived under human protection. Communications jammed at once and static filled the bridge. Mira ordered silent mode, cutting all unnecessary emissions. The council observers panicked, whispering that retreat was the only option. But Mira ignored them and began directing her officers to defensive positions. Thrixa's heart pounded, but her training took over. She recalled Mira's rule in chaos find rhythm. The drones spread like black ink across the void, searching for heat signatures. Mira turned to Thrixa and asked if she could sense any pattern from their movement. Thrixa closed her eyes and listened to the faint vibration through the hull. Each drone emitted a different hum frequency modulation for coordination. She traced them in her mind and suddenly saw the rhythm, a circular net designed to trap any escaping ship. She pointed to the empty zone between their rotations, and Mira instantly nodded. That was their only path to break through. The human fleet dived toward the gas giant using its thick upper atmosphere as cover. Lightning storms raged below, painting the sky in white arcs. Thrixa had never seen such fury of nature. Mira explained that humans had trained for centuries in conditions like these, because their homeworld was chaos made solid. The ships cut engines and drifted through turbulent clouds, using the static to hide their signatures. Enemy drones followed, but their sensors faltered in the charged air. Inside the storm, visibility dropped to nothing. Pilots relied on instinct and the rhythm of commands relayed by Mira herself. Thrixa manned a sensor station, tracking the faint outlines of the enemy dreadnought above the clouds. Its weapons burned through the mist, searching blindly. One blast grazed the Aurora Reach and knocked out half the systems. Sparks rained across the bridge, but Mira stood firm, giving calm orders. Her voice never rose above a whisper, and somehow that steadiness anchored everyone around her. When another explosion shook the hull, Thrixa realized the dreadnought was triangulating their position from reflected lightning strikes. She thought fast and ordered the atmospheric stabilizers to reverse polarity, releasing a burst of ions into the storm. The clouds lit up brighter than a sun flare, and the enemy sensors overloaded with false readings. Mira turned and smiled, slightly impressed. For a few seconds the enemy was blind, and Mira seized the moment, ordering all ships to scatter and attack from below. Human corvettes streaked through the clouds like shadows, firing slugs that curved along magnetic lines. The dreadnought took hit after hit, but still held strong. Thrixa could feel the pressure rising in her chest, as if the storm itself pressed on her. She whispered the rhythm of her breathing again, steady as Mira had taught, and her hands stopped shaking. When the dreadnought turned its main cannon toward the human flagship, Thrixa acted without thinking. She overrode the secondary drives, forcing a sudden roll that diverted the blast just enough for it to graze the hull, instead of piercing it. The explosion sent the Aurora Reach spinning through the clouds, trailing fire. Mira's last command before systems cut out was short and calm. Protect the civilians. Then silence swallowed the ship. Power died completely. Gravity flickered. Thrixa hung in the air, weightless, watching emergency lights blink red in the darkness. The council observers screamed, but Mira's voice came once more, faint through the emergency channel, telling everyone to hold positions and stay calm. Then even that faded. When Thrixa regained consciousness, the ship was still tumbling through dense cloud, but slowing. Half the crew were unconscious from the shock. The main reactor was offline and communication severed. She crawled to the nearest console, trying to reroute minimal power. Outside flashes of lightning revealed shapes in the storm, enormous fragments of wreckage slowly falling alongside them. She realized they were not alone. Other ships, human and alien alike, were drifting helplessly into the atmosphere, pulled by gravity. Thrixa forced herself to focus. Her head pounded, but the lessons remained. Panic wastes energy, calm directs it. She took command of her section and began giving orders to restore life support and stabilize rotation. The serum's clarity was gone, yet something inside her guided each move with precision, learned through experience, not chemistry. Slowly, the ship leveled out and the descent steadied into controlled glide. As the clouds thinned, she saw the moon surface below a gray ocean and storm-wrapped islands glowing with the light of evacuation beacons. Civilians were down there waiting for help, while the enemy dreadnought hovered above, still firing at anything that moved. The comm system flickered briefly, and she heard fragments of Mira's voice. The commander was alive, but trapped somewhere deeper in the ship. Thrixa clenched her fists and swore she would not let fear take hold again. She turned to the crew and said they would not fall today, not while any of them could still breathe. The Aurora Reach leveled its wings against the raging wind and prepared to rise again from the storm. The battle was far from over. This time Thrixa would fight not with borrowed power but with the calm strength she had learned from humanity itself, the hard choice, the Eu. Storm over Tethra's moon howled like a living beast tearing through the atmosphere with winds that could crush ships made of weaker metal, but the Aurora Reach refused to die. Systems flickered and hull plates burned from friction as the ship rode the edge of the upper clouds, balancing between fire and gravity. Thrixa stood at the center of the bridge, covered in soot and sweat, guiding the ship by instinct since most of the instruments were still blind. Around her the crew worked with grim determination, pulling wires, rerouting power, and sealing ruptures with whatever they could find. It was chaos, but there was rhythm in it, and Thrixa felt that rhythm pulse through her veins like the heartbeat of the ship itself. When the communications array sparked to life with a faint signal, Mira's voice returned calm and steady, though she sounded hurt. She had been trapped in the lower engineering bay when the blast cut the decks apart. Her orders were simple: hold position, protect the civilians, and prepare for counterstrike once the ship stabilized. The council observers begged for retreat, claiming that the dreadnought above was beyond their ability to fight, but Thrixa ignored them. Retreat meant leaving thousands of innocent lives undefended below. The moon's surface was covered with ocean, cities, small clusters of domes resting on floating platforms designed to harvest minerals from deep water vents. Those domes were glowing like stars as evacuation ships tried to launch, but the enemy drones patrolled the skies, destroying anything that rose too high. From her viewport, Thrixa could see streaks of light marking where shuttles were shot down. She clenched her jaw and ordered the ship to descend through the thickest part of the storm where lightning masked their heat. Signature. Mira's voice came through, again faint but firm, telling her to prepare for Starborn Phase 2 activation. Thrixa did not know what that meant exactly, but she trusted Mira without question. The commander's orders were to reach a low orbit position directly above the largest colony and hold until the ground signal confirmed evac readiness. It was suicidal, but it was their duty. As the Aurora Reach broke through the final layer of cloud, the enemy dreadnought loomed above them, massive and dark like a mountain hanging in the sky. Its cannons glowed red with heat as it prepared another volley. Thrixa's crew worked frantically to bring the shields back online, though only fragments of the generators still functioned. She shouted commands across the deck, and the team responded like a single organism. They rerouted auxiliary power from life support and redirected coolant from non-essential systems. The bridge lights dimmed as the energy bled into the shield grid. When the first barrage struck, the ship rocked but did not break. The Marines in the lower decks reported that enemy boarding pods were approaching. Thrixa ordered defensive squads to intercept, while she focused on maintaining their position above the colony. Every minute they held meant more civilians could reach evacuation craft. The council observers continued to protest until Thrixa silenced them with one cold glance. For the first time, she understood the human way of command. It was not about fear or authority, but about certainty, even in the face of doom. When the first boarding pod hit the hull, the sound echoed through the corridors like thunder. Thrixa switched to internal comms and guided the Marines using sensor ghosts to predict enemy routes. She heard Ortega's voice, the human sergeant she had met during earlier drills, barking short orders through the static. His squad was defending the main hangar where damaged shuttles were being repaired for evac use. The battle inside the ship turned brutal. The corridors filled with smoke and flashes of plasma fire. Ortega reported that a breach team had cut through the aft bulkhead and was pushing toward engineering where Mira was trapped. Thrixa knew if the enemy reached that section, the ship would be lost entirely. She left the bridge under the care of her first officer and joined the defense herself. She moved through half-lit hallways, stepping over debris and wounded crew. The serum might have left her system, but the memory of its focus still guided her. She breathed slow and deep, listening to each sound around her until every footstep and pulse of machinery formed a map in her mind. When she reached the engineering bay, the air was thick with smoke, and the red emergency lights turned everything into a hellish blur. Mira was there, limping slightly, her uniform torn but her eyes sharp as ever. She was directing a team to stabilize the reactor's coolant lines while fighting off boarders at the same time. Thrixa took a rifle from a fallen Marine and covered Mira's flank. They fought side by side, moving in perfect sync. Mira called out angles and Thrixa adjusted fire without hesitation. When the last invader fell, Mira gave her a quick nod and said they had done well, but the reactor was failing. The last overload from the enemy's cannon had cracked one of the magnetic seals. If it broke completely, it would vaporize half the moon. There was only one way to prevent it. They needed to manually eject the damaged core using the emergency release deep in the lower vent shaft. Thrixa volunteered immediately, but Mira shook her head. She said this was her ship, her responsibility. But Thrixa refused to stand down. They argued for a brief moment before Mira finally relented, choosing to trust the cadet who had already risked everything for lives that were not even her own species. Together they descended into the vent chamber where heat shimmered off metal and alarms screamed. The control lever for the core release was jammed, requiring manual override. From inside the safety cage, Thrixa looked at the readings and realized that whoever went in would not come back out. Before the radiation reached lethal levels, Mira stepped forward without hesitation, but Thrixa grabbed her arm. She said Earth needed leaders like her more than it needed martyrs. Before Mira could protest, Thrixa slammed the cage door shut from the outside and locked it. She turned the override wheel herself and pulled the lever with all her strength. The chamber filled with blinding light as the reactor core ejected into the storm outside. The explosion ripped through the clouds, sending a shockwave that pushed the dreadnought upward and disrupted its aim. Thrixa fell to her knees as the radiation. Alarms wailed, but the containment systems held long enough for Mira to drag her clear. The emergency shield sealed the chamber behind them. When the shaking stopped, the ship was alive and the colony below remained safe. Mira carried Thrixa to the med bay while shouting into the comm for status updates. Ortega's voice came back triumphant. They had cleared the remaining boarders and the evacuation ships were launching safely. Thrixa's vision blurred as she lay on the stretcher, hearing distant cheers through the comm speakers. Mira leaned over her and whispered that she had done what even humans might not have the strength to do, choosing sacrifice over safety. Thrixa smiled weakly and said she had only followed Mira's example, that courage was not born of power but of choice. When the dawn light broke through the fading storm, the Aurora Reach hovered above the moon, scarred and battered but victorious. The dreadnought retreated, leaving trails of smoke as it vanished into hyperspace. On the surface, the civilians looked up and saw the ship still standing, and they knew that humanity and its allies had not been broken. Mira looked down at the recovering Thrixa and silently activated Starborn. Phase 3, knowing that this was no longer just a human project. It was now the beginning of something shared between species, a promise forged in storm and sacrifice that the galaxy would soon. The reveal of Starborn, the silence that followed the storm, felt unreal as the Aurora Reach floated over the broken clouds like a ghost of steel. The battle was over, but the scars remained etched across every deck. Fire crews moved through the corridors, spraying coolant over molten panels, while engineers worked without pause to restore full power. Mira Khan walked slowly through the ruined bridge, her uniform torn and face marked with smoke, but her eyes still sharp. The victory was narrow and fragile, but it was theirs. Below them, the ocean colonies of Tethra still shone faintly through the mist, and thousands of civilians were alive because the Aurora Reach had refused to fall. Yet Mira knew the enemy would not stop here. The dreadnought that escaped would return with reinforcements once it repaired. Humanity and its allies had only bought time. In the med bay, Thrixa lay on the recovery bed, surrounded by the hum of machines. Her skin glowed faintly under the treatment lights, and her heartbeat echoed softly through the monitors. She was weak but alive. When Mira entered the room, Thrixa tried to rise, but Mira pressed a hand on her shoulder and told her to rest. The commander looked tired yet proud. She said that Starborn Phase 3 had been activated, and that Thrixa's courage had made it possible. Thrixa asked what that meant, and Mira took a deep breath before explaining. Starborn was never a single weapon. It was a layered system built to turn Earth itself into part of the defense network. Hidden within the planet's magnetosphere were field forges, structures buried in orbit that fed on solar wind and geomagnetic storms. They could channel energy into kinetic arcs, guiding projectiles through magnetic lines so that even small ships could strike with power beyond their size. Most of the galaxy used direct energy beams, but humanity had learned from nature how to use gravity and magnetism as allies. The field forges had remained dormant for decades, waiting for a code to awaken them. Mira's activation of Phase 3 had sent that code racing through space at the speed of light. Moments later, the first signs appeared. From the viewports of the Aurora Reach, faint rings of light shimmered around Earth's distant orbit, then spread outward along the lines of magnetic force. The arcs formed paths visible only to sensors glowing like veins of silver fire across the void. Small Terran corvettes began aligning their slingshot rails along those paths, connecting themselves to the network. Mira's voice filled the comms calm and commanding as she coordinated the operation. Each ship was to synchronize with the magnetosphere pulse and prepare for precision kinetic launch. The enemy fleet returning to finish the job had no idea what awaited them. Thrixa sat up slowly, watching through the medbay window as the arcs grew brighter. She felt the vibration through the hull, a deep hum that resonated with the same rhythm she had once felt when the serum coursed through her. Only now it was not inside her, it was everywhere outside, filling the space around them. Mira explained that this was the real essence of Starborn, not about enhancing individuals, but about uniting technology and willpower into a single focused force. Every ship became part of one great living network bound by purpose and discipline. The enemy dreadnought reappeared on sensors, accompanied by a full support fleet. Their commanders must have believed the humans crippled after the storm, because they advanced without caution. The Council observers watched in silence as Mira ordered the Aurora Reach into formation, with 2 surviving human frigates and 3 allied ships from the Solari and Tarsan fleets. Together they formed a spearhead at the center of the magnetic path. Mira's hand hovered above the firing console and her voice remained steady as she gave the command to charge rails. The moment the enemy opened fire, the magnetosphere responded. Energy from the planet's field surged through the rails and converted into kinetic bursts. The first volley of human slugs moved faster than any energy beam the galaxy had ever seen. They followed invisible curves through space, guided by magnetic lines, hitting targets from impossible angles. Enemy shields flared once and collapsed instantly under the cold force of pure velocity. No heat, no plasma, no light, just silent destruction. The dreadnought tried to retreat, but the magnetic arcs bent around its deflectors and struck again and again like invisible fists from the void. Thrixa watched in awe as the enemy fleet broke apart under the rain of unseen blows. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. The Council observers whispered that such power should not exist in mortal hands, but Mira ignored them. Her face showed neither pride nor anger, only focus. She ordered precise targeting to disable engines and weapons rather than destroy ships outright. She wanted to end the battle, not the lives within it. Thrixa realized then that this restraint was what truly made humanity dangerous. They had power enough to annihilate, yet they chose control instead of chaos. As the battle unfolded, Thrixa noticed something strange on the sensors. The magnetic network extended far beyond Earth, and its moon reaching toward the asteroid fields and even the outer colonies. Each point acted as a node amplifying the next. Humanity had hidden this system across its territory, quietly building the web in secret, under the guise of mining platforms and communication relays. For decades, they had been preparing for the day when the galaxy would finally turn its full strength against them. Starborn was not built for conquest, but for survival and deterrence, a message carved in energy lines saying that Earth would never again kneel when the last enemy ship powered down and signaled surrender. The silence returned. The arcs faded one by one until only faint trails of light remained across the stars. Mira ordered ceasefire and opened broad-spectrum channels to broadcast a message to all fleets, both friend and foe. Her voice carried clear and calm across space. She said that humanity did not seek domination, only safety, that the Starborn network existed not as a weapon of war, but as a shield for every world willing to stand beside them. Those who attacked would face the storm, but those who sought peace would share its protection. The Council could no longer dismiss Earth as a primitive world. Their observers recorded every detail and sent frantic reports to their homeworlds, warning that the humans had achieved something impossible without ever violating the treaties. They had simply used nature itself as defense. Thrixa smiled faintly despite her exhaustion, because she understood now that the true secret of humanity was not their weapons or their technology, but their ability to make even the wildest forces obey their will. As the Aurora Reach moved into stable orbit, Mira stood at the command deck looking out at the faint glow of the magnetic lines fading into darkness. She whispered that the galaxy would see this as power, but it was more than that. It was proof that unity born of courage could reshape the stars. Thrixa stood beside her, still weak but standing tall, and replied that perhaps the galaxy needed to be reminded that strength and mercy could live in the same heart. Mira nodded, and for a long moment neither spoke as the first light of dawn touched the edge of the viewport, bathing them both in gold. The humans had revealed Starborn, and with it the truth that Earth would never again be the silent planet at the edge of the map. It had become the storm itself, calm in its center, fierce at its edge, and ready to defend all who chose to stand beneath its shield. The counterattack and the moral line. The days that followed the activation of Starborn changed everything in the sector, because no one in the galaxy had ever seen power so quiet and so absolute. The enemy fleets that had once hunted human convoys now drifted in surrender, waiting to be escorted to safe harbors. The magnetic lines of Earth's field still glowed faintly, like veins of blue fire marking where the battle had ended. The Galactic Council tried to make sense of what they had witnessed, but their languages had no word for what humanity had done. It was not victory through conquest or destruction. It was victory through precision and restraint. Mirakan knew the hardest part was still ahead because power always brought temptation and fear in equal measure. The Council was already whispering that Starborn was too dangerous to exist, and there would be calls to dismantle it, but Mira was not ready to give up what it saved. Billions on the bridge of the Aurora. Reach repairs continued while the crew rested in shifts. The ship bore deep scars from the storm and battle, yet it stood proud. Thrixa was cleared from the medbay, though her strength had not fully returned. She walked slowly across the deck, feeling the hum of the ship through her feet, and realized she could almost hear the rhythm of Starborn pulsing through space. Mira greeted her with a rare smile and told her they had intercepted a distress signal from one of the enemy's surviving command ships drifting near the outer edge of the magnetosphere. It carried wounded soldiers and non-combatants trapped after their fleet's collapse. The Council wanted the humans to destroy it to send a message of dominance, but Mira refused. She said a message of mercy would speak louder than fear. They set course for the drifting ship. As they approached, the derelict vessel came into view, a massive cruiser torn open along its spine, venting atmosphere and debris. The sensor feed showed life signs flickering weakly within the central sections. Mira ordered a rescue team to prepare but warned them to expect traps. Thrixa volunteered to join the mission despite her condition, because she wanted to understand what kind of enemies they had really faced. When the shuttle landed inside the damaged hangar, they found chaos bodies of soldiers, both human and alien, scattered amid the wreckage. The survivors were terrified, expecting execution. Instead, Mira's Marines offered medical kits and water. The enemy captain, a tall, scaled being with fractured armor, stared in disbelief and asked why they would help those who had tried to kill them. Mira answered simply that humanity's strength meant nothing if it could not protect even its foes from needless death. Word of the rescue spread quickly through the fleets. Allied channels praised the humans while others condemned them, saying it was weakness to spare an enemy. Mira ignored both sides. She knew every act of mercy now would define how the galaxy viewed Earth in the centuries to come. Thrixa saw how this decision affected the rescued soldiers who had been taught that humans were monsters. When they realized the humans were risking their own lives to save them, they broke down in tears. It was the first real victory Mira felt since the war began, because it was not won through force but through choice. Back on the Aurora, Reach Mira gathered her senior officers and the Council, observers, for a strategic meeting. They had new intelligence from the rescued crew. The invasion spear had not been the last wave. There was another force gathering on the far edge of the system, composed of ships too large to hide. They were planning to strike again to prove that human defenses could be overwhelmed by sheer mass. The Council demanded immediate retaliation, but Mira refused to launch a preemptive strike. She said Starborn would defend but never provoke, because if humanity started fighting like its enemies, it would lose what made it different. The observers called her idealistic, but she stood her ground. When the new enemy force arrived, it was vast enough to block out starlight. Dozens of capital ships advanced slowly, their formation wide and deliberate. They wanted the humans to panic and fire first, but Mira ordered every ship to hold position. She contacted the enemy fleet directly, broadcasting on open channels for the whole sector to hear. She gave them a choice: withdraw and live, or continue and face the storm again. For a long moment, the galaxy held its breath. The enemy replied with silence, then moved forward, opening fire. Mira did not flinch. She ordered the Starborn network to engage defensive alignment. The magnetic lines brightened across the void, and energy rippled like a living ocean. Every Terran and allied ship became a node in the web, redirecting kinetic force instead of returning it. The first enemy volley curved around the shield arcs and spun back toward its origin, shredding their own forward line. Panic erupted among the attackers. Some tried to flee while others fired wildly in desperation. Mira used the moment to issue new commands. She wanted the fleet to disable engines, shields, and weapons, in that exact order, to minimize casualties. Her officers obeyed instantly, their precision perfect after months of training. Thrixa watched from the tactical station as the battle unfolded like a dance. Each human strike disarmed rather than destroyed. Each enemy ship left adrift rather than shattered. The storm of power that once symbolized annihilation now became a shield of mercy. She realized this was the moral line Mira had spoken of, that true strength was not in how much destruction one could unleash, but in how much destruction one could choose to prevent. When the last enemy cruiser was immobilized, Mira gave the order to cease fire. The battlefield fell silent except for the hum of magnetic fields fading into background radiation. The surrender signals came slowly then all at once as lights blinked across the sensor grid. The entire fleet had surrendered without a single fatality after the first exchange. The Council observers stared at the display, unable to speak. Humanity had just achieved total victory without extermination. Mira turned to her crew and said quietly that the war was over for now, but the real challenge would begin when the Council debated what to do with Starborn. Thrixa asked what she would tell them, and Mira answered that she would tell them the truth, that humanity had not built Starborn to dominate, but to teach. The galaxy had spent ages believing that peace came from fear, but humans had shown that peace could come from choice. She told Thrixa that one day the command of Starborn might belong to more than just Earth, and that day would mark the beginning of something greater than any single species. As they escorted the captured ships toward neutral territory, the crews from both sides worked together, repairing damage and tending to the wounded. No one spoke of revenge. For the first time in living memory, enemies shared food and water under the same stars. Thrixa looked out at the glowing lines of the magnetic field slowly fading, and thought that the universe had just witnessed something far greater than a battle. It had seen humanity hold the line not through anger but through understanding. When the last rescued ship departed, and the Aurora Reach turned homeward, the sky above them shimmered with the soft light of dawn reflecting off distant worlds. The galaxy had been changed forever. Earth's message was clear: the Starborn were not destroyers, they were guardians, and the storm would always rise for those who could not stand alone. Would you like me to continue with the ending full circle and promise next in the same simple flowing 800-word style to complete the story? The ending full circle and promise. The war that had begun in fear ended in silence as the fleets that once darkened the stars now drifted under escort toward the neutral zones. The Starborn network remained alive but dormant, its magnetic lines faint and slow, pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Across the galaxy, the news spread faster than light that the humans had fought the largest armada in living memory, and not destroyed it, but saved it. No one had believed such restraint possible. For centuries, the races of the Council had feared humanity for their unpredictable nature, for the fire that burned inside them. But now that fire had become something else, a light instead of a blaze, the Aurora Reach returned to Earth under escort, through corridors of ships that saluted as it passed. Its hull was scarred, blackened from battle, but its emblem still shone clear, the mark of Starborn forged under storm and sacrifice. As the ship descended into Earth's atmosphere, the sight that greeted the crew made every scar worth it. Cities glittered across continents, reborn from the ashes of past wars, and people stood in the streets, looking up at the sky where the clouds parted for their heroes. Mira Khan stood on the observation deck watching the world she had sworn to protect grow larger beneath her. She had fought too many battles to feel joy easily, but in that moment pride replaced exhaustion. Thrixa stood beside her, now wearing the insignia of an ambassador. Her people had joined the new alliance, that the humans were forming an alliance not of dominance but of choice. Together they watched as the Aurora Reach landed at the coastal command port, surrounded by green hills and the blue sea. The air smelled of salt and rain. Crowds lined the landing platform, waving banners in 100 languages. When Mira stepped down the ramp, silence fell, followed by a single cheer that grew into a roar that shook the sky. Thrixa followed behind her, overwhelmed by the noise, the color, the emotion that poured from humans like sunlight. She realized then that for all their technology and discipline, the true power of humanity came from their spirit, their refusal to let despair rule them. Later that evening, the Council convened on Earth for the first time in history. Representatives from every major species filled the great dome of the United Assembly, their voices hushed as Mira and Thrixa entered. On the central platform stood the symbol of the Starborn Protocol, a crystal sphere encased in rings of alloy representing the unity of planet and sky. The council speaker demanded to know whether Earth would dismantle Starborn as many feared. Mira looked at the gathered leaders and saw not enemies but frightened children hiding behind protocol and fear. She told them Starborn would not be dismantled because it was no longer a weapon, it had become a promise. She spoke slowly, her voice carrying across the chamber. Humanity, she said, had been called dangerous, unpredictable, and primitive, yet those same traits had saved not only Earth but the countless worlds that relied on human resolve. The galaxy had built its peace on fragile balance through fear, and treaties that could be broken with a word. Starborn was different. It was a system that thrived only when the many worked as one, and it punished those who sought to destroy. It was a reflection of the best part of humanity, the part that stood between chaos and order and chose compassion even in battle. She finished by offering access to parts of Starborn's defensive web to all member worlds, but kept the core under joint command between Earth and her allies. The chamber fell silent for a long time before the council finally agreed. The vote passed unanimously, and for the first time the galaxy united not out of fear but respect. Thrixa was invited to speak next. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied it. She told them about the serum accident that had brought her into this story, how she had seen what it meant to feel human focus, and how that focus was not chemical, but moral. She said the humans had shown her that strength was not about being fearless, but about facing fear with open eyes. She called them the Starborn not because they had conquered the stars, but because they had learned to carry their light into the darkest storms. The council applauded her speech, and that moment sealed the beginning of the Starborn alliance. After the assembly, Mira and Thrixa walked together along the shoreline where the waves broke softly against the rocks. The sunset painted the horizon red and gold. Mira said she would soon retire from command to teach the next generation of Starborn officers, those who would protect rather than rule. Thrixa smiled and told her that her people had already begun training programs based on the same principles: discipline, empathy, and balance. Mira nodded quietly and said that perhaps this was the real victory, not the battle itself, but the change it brought to minds and hearts. As night fell, they stopped near the memorial grounds where a monument was being built for the fallen of Tethra's moon. The names of Marines, engineers, civilians, and even former enemies who had died during the storm were carved into the stone. Mira placed her hand on the surface and whispered a promise that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Thrixa added a small crystal from her homeworld to the base of the monument, saying it was to remind future generations that this unity had been forged not from one species but from many. Far above them, the faint glow of the magnetosphere shimmered like a halo around the planet. It pulsed slowly as if the Earth itself was breathing. Starborn was still there, silent, watching a guardian bound by will, not by command. Across the galaxy, new treaties were signed. Fleets once built for war were repurposed for exploration and rescue. The energy that had once been used to build weapons now powered colonies and healed worlds long scarred by conflict. The Starborn network became a symbol carved into ships and flags, representing the shared oath that no civilization would stand alone again. Years later, children born after the war grew up under a different sky. They studied the history of the Starborn and read about the humans who had turned storms into shields. They learned about the alien cadet who had once drunk a human serum by mistake and ended up changing the course of history. In classrooms across countless worlds, the story was told not as a tale of victory but as a lesson that courage and compassion could walk side by side. Mira spent her final years teaching at the academy she founded on the cliffs above the sea. Every evening she watched the sun sink into the horizon and thought of the friends she had lost and the peace they had earned. Thrixa visited often, now an ambassador between worlds, and every time they met they would talk about that storm on Tethra and how, from that chaos, something beautiful had been born. One evening, as stars began to appear, Mira looked up and saw a faint streak of light across the sky, the reflection of a Starborn patrol passing overhead. She smiled and said quietly that humanity had once been called reckless dreamers, but perhaps the galaxy had needed a dream to remind it how to live. Thrixa nodded and answered that the dream was no longer only human, it belonged to all who had seen the storm and chosen the light, and so the story of the Starborn came full circle, from fear to unity, from destruction to understanding, from isolation to alliance. The galaxy no longer whispered of humans as monsters or anomalies. Now they were called the guardians of the dawn, the keepers of the storm, the ones who turned even chaos into peace. The last message, transmitted from the Aurora Reach before its decommissioning, carried Mira's final words, simple and clear: We stand, we build, we protect. Those words echoed through time and across the stars, a promise that as long as the Starborn existed, the light of Earth would never fade.